David Stearns met with the media to give his end of the season review on Wednesday. What did we learn? I'll talk about it on today's show.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. And for the first time since the Mets got eliminated, David Stearns met with the media for his end of the season sort of review, answered a bunch of different questions on a variety of topics when it comes to what this team just accomplished and what they're looking to do next season, what the offseason has in store for the New York Mets. And I thought Stearns was very enlightening in some respects. And of course, he also kept his cards close to the vest, which I can appreciate for sure. His opening statement, he talked about the hurt that they're feeling right now. He said they made it far enough for it to really hurt. He said that's a good thing. It's a good thing that they care, that what they're doing is important. He talked about the identity as an organization that can be carried moving forward. He said that, the passion for which they played with, the fun which they play with, could all be, carried over next year. He said the seriousness of how they pursued winning, all those different tenets of what made them the team they were this year could be repeated next year, really just using this season as a building block, as a springboard moving forward to continue to have success and find that sustained success that they've been preaching ever since David Stearns took over the franchise when he was hired as the president of baseball operations. He mentioned how the success, though, from this year doesn't mean that the success for next year was guaranteed, but he said that he was energized by the work that it will take to continue to have that success as an organization moving forward. He said the mix will be different every single year. So the Mets are not going to just carry over the exact same roster. Again, the key core elements can carry over, but the group might change. Now, there's a lot that we're going to talk about when it comes to just some various notes, and I'll get to those in the final segment. Injury notes and some players, how he's feeling about certain guys, and what their role might be next year. We'll go through all of it, but there's obviously a couple of big free agents that were at the top of discussion. And of course, that was Pete Alonso. Stearns was pretty funny when he talked about that. He said, Pete's a great Met. He said he was right out there before I came in. I told him I'm about to answer a bunch of questions about you. He said Pete Alonso wished him good luck. He said he's a great Met. He said, I hope we have him back. He says, I think we both understand that this is a process and everyone has their own interest. Pete deserves to go out in the free agent market and see what's out there and ultimately make the best decision for him and his family. We talked about Pete Alonso a lot on yesterday's show, and I think what David Stearns said pretty much backs up everything that was discussed on that podcast, where the New York Mets have some idea in mind where they're willing to go on this contract for Pete Alonso. He said that he never spoke about a contract with Pete Alonso directly. So those conversations are best held between, a player's representation and the team and Scott Boras, as David Stearns said a year ago, typically takes these conversations into the open market of free agency. So we didn't learn anything other than a couple of interesting remarks, like him saying, I hope we have him back. Talked about how invested Pete Alonso has been in the team, and obviously showed that there is going to be a level of interest in having him remain with the New York Mets for the rest of his career. But the market's going to speak on this. The Mets are not going to spend dumb money because they're emotionally attached to Pete Alonso. If there is a team out there that looks at Pete Alonso and says, that is our one guy, and we are going to go all in to sign Pete Alonso, and there's a team out there that is willing to offer him 8 years and $25 million per, and there's a what would that be? Jeez. 8 years, that would be $200 million contract for Pete Alonso that's on the table. If that's there for Pete and it's no deferred money and it's just 8 years, 25 million per, it's straight up, he's probably playing for another team. But like we talked about yesterday, if he goes out into the market, there's teams that are offering him 5 years, 6 years, and it is at a reasonable dollar amount. I think the Mets will have last say on this, where Pete Alonso, I'm sure, has expressed to Scott Boras or will express to Scott Boras that his ideal outcome will be returning to the New York Mets. They will go out, they will shop deals. That could be an extended period of time. That could take a while. It could be after Juan Soto's free agency is handled. It could be after Alex Bregman. It could be after Christian Walker sets his own market for first baseman. And Pete Alonso might be sort of this last big bat standing for a while. And ultimately, offers will come in. The Mets will have their opportunity to match that contract. We'll see what happens. But I didn't come out of this thinking that David Stearns is diametrically opposed to bringing Pete Alonso back. In fact, I think it's more indicative that he would be very open to it, but they're not going to sign a contract that hamstrings them moving forward. He said as much. So if Pete gets 8 years, maybe even 7 years, those might be the lines in the sand that the Mets aren't willing to cross. Now, when it comes to the other big area of need in free agency, which is all the starting pitchers that are leaving and having to replace them, David Stearns talked about being in a similar position last year where the Mets had to fill a bunch of innings, and they were able to execute a plan last year that worked out. He's very confident they could do that again. He said that that could be by bringing some of these guys back, or it could be from looking elsewhere. When it comes to Sean Manaea and Luis Severino, he spoke very highly of them, and he talked about how it was important for the franchise this year to prove that players can come to New York, play for the Mets, and have success. He talked about how that is important for them just moving forward, that they have a good process in place to keep pitchers healthy and have them be effective, but also how other pitchers might take notice of that and look at New York as a place that they could go to have success and to further their careers. He said that ultimately it is a credit to Sevy and Sean as far as what they ended up doing this year, the work they put in. But he said those types of deals are always going to be part of our strategy. Finding those diamonds in the rough, finding those reclamation products, guys that might not be at the top of the market based on their production the previous season, but have some upside that the Mets can tap into and maybe get more out of. So don't expect that just because the Mets maybe sign a Corbin Burnes, that they're not going to look at whether it's Walker Buehler, whatever pitcher is of that ilk who's hitting the market, not off of their best year, but has stuff that maybe can be improved on. And in the Mets system, maybe they can get a little bit more out of. Ultimately, when it comes to spending, and that's where we're going to spend a lot of time on the next segment here, David Stearns had a very interesting quote. I think this was the money quote, no pun intended there, the money quote, though, of this entire press conference. He said, quote, "We've got financial flexibility, which means pretty much the entirety of the player universe is potentially accessible to us. That's an enormous opportunity. I envision us taking advantage of that opportunity and being aggressive in certain spaces." But he also said, "We also want to set up our organizational pattern so that we can invest where we think we need to on an annual basis." So what does all that mean for the New York Mets? How much money will they have to spend? We're going to talk about that in the next segment. First, though, quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page you place your bets. You got NBA back in action now, NHL, and of course, NFL. So a lot of games to choose from, not to mention the World Series. And you're going to get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So let's say you like the Dodgers to beat the Yankees in the World Series, throw $5 on that. You're going to win no matter what, because even if the Yankees win the World Series, you're going to get those $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That is $200 of bonus bets guaranteed, win or lose, when you place your first $5 bet. Find all of this over at FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports when you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube today, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to get to 11,000 subscribers by the end of the World Series. Appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. All right, so let's go back to that quote one more time because it really was the headline from the press conference. David Stearns says, quote, "We got financial flexibility," which means pretty much the entirety of the player universe is potentially accessible to us. That's an enormous opportunity. I envision us taking advantage of that opportunity and being aggressive in certain spaces. But he also mentioned you want to make sure that you could spend every year. So what does that mean for the New York Mets? Well, as David Stearns says himself, we have a lot of money coming off the books. I would expect us to spend a good portion of that. How much money is coming off the books? Well, according to Kylie McDaniel in a story that he wrote about the Mets last month, he did the math and he said the New York Mets will have just over $173 million coming off the books in expiring contracts, dead money from the $358 million CBT payroll figure they had this year. That's the collective bargaining tax. So when you have to look at the Mets payroll, you don't look at the active payroll, what they're paying their players currently. What you look at is luxury tax payroll. So, for example, Starling Marte makes more money this year than he has throughout his entire 4-year deal. I think it was like 22 million or something like that. Let me look real quick. But the point is, that's not what you have to worry about for Starling Marte when it comes to his contract. You worry about his luxury tax number, which is the average annual value of his 4-year, $78 million deal. So when it comes to luxury tax, it's $19.5 million. His contract was actually split up. I actually had this a little bit wrong. First year, it was $15.75 million. And then it's actually been the same figure the last 3 years, $20.75 million. But again, the luxury tax number is $1.25 million less than that because that first year brought down the AAV across the entire deal. So when you look at the Mets payroll situation, they have a little over $55 million coming off the books for Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander. They had $15 million in James McCann and Omar Narvaez this year. You look at guys they cut midseason between Adrian Hauser, Jake Diekman, Joey Wendell, Tomas Nido, and Jorge Lopez. That's another $15 million. So right there, what was dead money at the end of the season, that's $85 million off the books. When you combine Luis Severino, Sean Manaea, Jose Quintana, Harrison Bader, JD Martinez, Adam Ottavino, Pete Alonso, all those guys, that's over $85 million. So right there, you get to the $170 million number. There's obviously other guys that have lesser salaries coming off the books, like a Jose Iglesias, who's playing on the minimum. Bottom line, the New York Mets next year, if you look at their luxury tax payroll, this is a rough estimate based on what I can see right now. They estimate arbitration numbers. So, for example, David Peterson's in arbitration. You have Paul Blackburn in arbitration. They estimate what they think those guys are going to get, but we still don't know what those figures are currently. Bottom line, the Mets are looking at somewhere between $150 and $160 million, potentially a little bit more than that, on their books next season when it comes to a luxury tax perspective. Now, David Stearns said that he will keep all the luxury tax thresholds in mind because they're all important, right? They all come with different penalties. The worst threshold, the Steve Cohen tax, is $60 million over whatever the competitive balance tax threshold is set for that year. It goes up each season. Next year, it is at $241 million. So the Steve Cohen tax line will be set at $301 million. So let's just say the Mets want to get under that threshold. I don't think they're going to get under all of them, but that could be the only one that I see them maybe dipping below, right? If they wanted to do that, and they are currently at, let's say it's $160 million, they would have $140 million to spend this offseason in free agency. That is a lot of money. I'm not talking about overall. I'm talking about for their 2025 payroll. You can give Juan Soto $600 million. But what is he making next year? What is his AAV? What is the luxury tax hit? That's the important figure. You look at Shohei Ohtani. He has the highest AAV in Major League Baseball. It's not $70 million. It was a $700 million contract over 10 years, but there was deferrals in it, a lot of deferrals. And that brought down the present day money value of his contract to around $460 million. So his AAV is $46 million. The highest I think Juan Soto would get per year would be just over that $46 million. If that's where they look to set the record, I think where they will look to set the record on Juan Soto is the present day value number. So I don't think that Soto is going to take deferred money. So if Ohtani's present day value is $460 million, expect Juan Soto to have his next contract start in the $500 million range. If he was to make $40 million a year, which is what Aaron Judge is currently making over 13 years, which is the contract that Bryce Harper signed, the length of it at least, at his stage in free agency, he could be looking at a $520 million contract. I imagine there'd be opt-outs in it because I'm sure Scott Boras and Bryce Harper regret there was not opt-outs in his contract, so expect them to be in there. And that's not even a bad thing if the New York Mets pursue Juan Soto, because if he opts out of the deal after 5 years, you got the best 5 years of Juan Soto, then he hits the market. But all of that future, topics that we can discuss, what a Soto contract looks like, all of that good stuff. And tomorrow's show, remember, I'm going to talk about who you should root for in the World Series as it relates to Juan Soto. But the point through all of this is to just say the Mets have a ton of money to play with. They can give Juan Soto $40 million a year, give Pete Alonso $25 million a year, and still have $75 million to invest in their pitching for next season. If you think about how much they spent on their pitching this past year, you spent on Sevy, on Minaya, on some relievers. It didn't sniff $75 million on an AAV basis when it comes to luxury tax for next season. They can sign 2 starting pitchers and relievers for $75 million. So what you're looking at with the New York Mets here, this is the first time in David Stearns' entire career where he has absolutely no restraints on him. When he was the GM and then eventually the president of the Brewers, he was constantly having to be creative. And that creativity won't leave him. When he was asked about the trade market, he said, somebody asked, will it be all of free agency? And he said, no, he laughed and said, no, I like operating in the trade market. We're going to be open to every avenue for player acquisition. So if the Mets have an opportunity to jump on a starting pitcher, and let's just say there's some team that was infatuated by the 1 week that Luis Acuna shined in the big leagues, and they want Acuna, and they have a good starting pitcher that's under control for 3 years, and the Mets decide, you know what, let's take this cost-controlled starting pitcher here. Let's add him into the mix, and then let's sign Corbin Burnes. Like, they have the ability to do really whatever David Stearns' heart desires. And you can tell he is excited about it. Last year, there was restraints. They had a ton of dead money on the books. That all goes away. Okay? Last year, every penny spent was double because of where the Mets were when it came to the luxury tax. Now, let's just say they signed Juan Soto, and let's say they signed Pete Alonso, and let's just say they are looking at a contract for Corbin Burnes that they really like. They can do it all, and they could balloon their payroll right back to $350 million because Steve Cohen could always give David Stearns the green light. But they aren't going to hamstring themselves long term. So what does that mean? Sean Manaea hits the market, and the Mets are interested in signing him to a 3-year deal, and the market tells us that he's going to get 5 years. All right, well, buy Sean Manaea. Maybe they don't want to pay for Sean Manaea's age 38 and 39 season. Maybe they just want to pay for age 33, 34, and 35. Whatever it is, right? Same thing with Juan Soto. If the bidding goes to 15 years, they might not have the appetite to do that. Maybe they don't even want to go beyond 10 years. Maybe they are more intrigued by a high AAV, shorter term deal. With Pete Alonso, we already talked about if it gets to 8 years, maybe that's too much. But if it's a 5-year deal, maybe they're all in. We don't know the parameters that they will set. And David Stearns said as much himself. He said there are no hard and fast rules in regards to spending on pitchers long term, and really just in general, he was sort of saying, right? So he talked about that idea, right? So are the Mets going to sign Corbin Burnes? Here's what he said about long-term investments on pitchers, because somebody said, look, you've never really done that in your career, right? With the Brewers, he didn't have a chance to sign a Corbin Burnes. He had Corbin Burnes, but to give him $200+ million, there was no chance that was going to happen in Milwaukee. That's why, with David Stearns already gone, the current regime in Milwaukee traded Corbin Burnes with this last year of his deal to get some value, and they got a player in Joey Ortiz that might just replace another guy that they're not going to be able to sign in Willy Adames, as Joey Ortiz could become their starting shortstop next year. So that's how Stearns used to have to operate. But now it's a little more open. So they might explore, what would it take to sign Corbin Burnes? Is this an investment that they are interested in? He said when it comes to long-term investments for pitchers, if you look at the history of long-term investments in pitchers, it's not always a rosy picture, but there are pitchers who have pitched well into their mid-30s and have done well. If we can identify that, then there could be some exceptions. So maybe that is Burnes. Maybe that is, I don't know who else is out there that's a little bit older. Maybe that's Max Fried. Maybe that's Sean Manaea, right? There's definitely going to be interest in adding a top-end starting pitcher, and those guys get long-term deals. I think it's just a matter of how crazy the bidding gets and what they feel comfortable with. So you look at this free agent class, and I think it's sort of top-heavy when it comes to the position players. You got your Soto, Alonso, Anthony Santander, Teoscar Hernandez, Alex Bregman. There's some names at the top of the list that you might like. But I don't think the Mets need to sign 4 position players for their current roster. We're going to talk about in the next segment all the guys that could be in the mix next year that David Stearns, was asked some questions about. But I think the Mets have the ability to spend at the top of the market and identify the guys at the top of the market that they want to invest significantly in. Juan Soto is first to mind. Corbin Burnes might be the top pitcher that they would target. Pete Alonso, because of what he means to the franchise, and maybe depending on his relative market, he might be a little more affordable than you're expecting currently. Alex Bregman might be a no-go. They might look at Anthony Santander, and maybe he's going to get 5 years, and they don't like his defense in the outfield and think he's going to have to be a DH, and maybe they don't want to clog up the DH. All of those things get factored in, but we are in for an offseason that's a lot more similar to the one following the 2022 season than the one after last year. Last year, I think the Mets had to be very selective, and there was only one free agent they identified that was worthy of that type of a long-term commitment. You look at the Dodgers, and who do they spend big money on? The no doubt about it, can't miss free agents. Mookie Betts traded and extended. Freddie Freeman, free agency. Shohei Ohtani, free agency. Yoshinobu Yamamoto, a 25-year-old starting pitcher in free agency. Those are the guys they've invested in. Other guys, Corey Seager with a checkered injury history, we'll let him walk to Texas. Trey Turner got 11 years, over $300 million. Let him go to Philly. They are going to be, the Dodgers, selective on who they give long-term deals to. They wouldn't give Teoscar Hernandez a 5-year deal, but if he can fall in their lap on a 1-year deal, that's the move they make. I don't think the Mets are trying to follow the Dodger model, and we will talk about that in the next segment. David Stearns pushed back on that notion. But that is a very smart, well-run baseball team, and I think you can learn something from how they have done it. And I think that for the New York Mets, they will be very selective on the type of players that deserve that heavy investment on a long-term deal, but they also could outpay the market on the short-term deals. And that's where they could find a lot of value, because they could have a big payroll for 2025 and have a lot of money come off the books so that they can go right back into the market and spend aggressively for 2026. So I think that is the kind of scope that we're looking at here for the Mets going to free agency. They got a lot of potential areas of need. There's, of course, a bunch of free agents that can fill those needs, and they are going to explore every single avenue, every single free agent on the market. They're going to run through their models. They're going to run through their processes. They're going to have discussions. They're going to see which players they should target, and they will pursue the ones they like the most very aggressively. And David Stearns, for the first time, has that financial flexibility to really go in on some guys. That's why I still believe the Mets have a very good chance of coming away with Juan Soto. But hey, those are some topics that we're going to spend a lot of time on throughout the offseason. I want to close here just going through some more of my notes from the things that David Stearns said in this presser. So we'll get to them in just a minute. First, though, another quick word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. And Game Time now has the new feature, Game Time Picks, that makes it easier to get tickets for your favorite live events because they're going to filter out the fluff and show you only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. Sometimes you pull up those seat maps on the app and it can be a little bit jarring, right? There's seats all over the place on sale, but what are the best possible deals? Game Time Picks make it so much easier for you. You can take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets and more with Game Time Picks. Down the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONMLB. You're going to get $20 off your first order. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure to become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service. We're going to updates from me anytime news breaks in the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. You can also take part in our Locked On Mets sign photo giveaways, and you will get some exclusive information about free agency. The more and more I dive into some free agents I like, others I don't, the insiders will get that info first before it is shared on the podcast. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description or go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. All right, so let's just touch on a bunch of players that were mentioned throughout this presser. When it came to injury updates on Kodai Senga, Francisco Lindor, and Brandon Nimmo, David Stearns was confident they will all have normal off seasons. With Lindor and Nimmo, he said they sort of played through the worst of their injuries, and he said Nimmo was moving much better at the end of the playoffs. He said Lindor really didn't feel much of anything at all by the end of it. So those guys go into the offseason hopefully just resting up, recovering. They should be full go in spring training. Kodai Senga, he said he got to a point where it should be a normal offseason for him, which is huge. Obviously, it was a crazy year with injuries for Senga, but they expect him to be ready to go for spring training. One little injury note that I have yet to talk about in the show that wasn't even mentioned in this presser was Paul Blackburn. He had some procedure on the spinal fluid. Bottom line, it said a 4 to 5 month recovery timeline. So he might actually not have a full, clean bill of health by the time he gets to spring training. It might be a little bit into next year before we see Paul Blackburn. 5 months from now is what? November, December, January, February, March. So, he probably gets a little bit of a later start next year. There is a world where the Mets do sort of the, I don't know if cruel thing is the right word, but they non-tender him. The estimation right now and what he would make in arbitration is $6 million. You traded something to get him, though. I think they'll probably keep him, and hopefully he's back next year and able to contribute to the rotation. All right, when it comes to Francisco Alvarez, David Stearns was very complimentary of the season he had overall. Talked about a catcher at this stage of his career, all that was tasked of him to lead the pitching staff and everything else. He used the phrase budding superstar. So that shows you how the Mets still value Francisco Alvarez at the absolute highest degree, expect him to be a big part of the team moving forward. When it came to pre-arbitration extensions, he said that it takes mutual interest in those types of things, but he has signed those deals in the past. So when it comes to Mark Vientos, Francisco Alvarez, those types of conversations could take place this offseason. When it came to Vientos and a positional change, he said he would not speculate on that. He's not going to give us, oh, yeah, we told Mark to start playing first base because Pete Alonso's gone. Like, he wasn't going to say that. So I'm sure when they met with Mark Vientos and had a sort of end-of-season review with him, as they do with all of their players, they probably said, we'd like you to work at first and third this offseason to keep that potential available to them. But they're not going to tell the media that right now. One injury note that I'm looking at that I missed on, Daniel Nunez. His PRP injection went well. He had a flexor strain. They said, or Stearns said that he will throw in November, and if all things go well with that, he should have a fairly normal off season. Also, another injury note, Ronnie Mauricio, he said has progressed slower than they expected, still not doing any baseball activities, close to a year without baseball activities. That's the first step before they even think about what his role might be next season. Funny enough, I saw, not funny, but I got some comments on my Pete Alonso podcast yesterday about how Ronnie Mauricio is the answer at third base. And this is why I still am of the belief that you sign Pete Alonso, because you can't just count on Ronnie Mauricio, who hasn't played baseball in a year, that he's just going to all of a sudden be able to hit the ground running on a torn ACL or coming off a torn ACL and just be fine and just be ready to take the challenge of taking that leap to the big leagues in his first year after missing an entire year away from baseball. Ronald Acuna Jr. did not look good his first year coming off his ACL injury, and that's an MVP. So I would really temper my expectations on what Ronnie Mauricio will give to the Mets next season. Brett Baty, David Stearns said his role is to be decided. He said the Mets still have a high opinion of Baty. Said it's tough right now, might be even tough in spring training to know where he's going to fit. Talked about Baty increasing his versatility as a player. They said talented players can step up and take advantage of opportunities when they come on, and it can be a big part of our team. That's sort of alluding to what we saw this year from Iglesias and from Vientos. So I don't think Brett Baty has enough trade value that I would expect them to move him. I think Brett Baty goes into camp fighting for a job, and he could be an option at second. It could be an option at third. It could be an option in the outfield potentially. I wouldn't be surprised if they had him go back to the well on that and learn to play some left field. And then you sort of see where things end up developing. When it came to pitchers like David Peterson, Tyler McGill, and Jose Budo, he was asked about the roles they would have. He said that roles evolve over the course of the season. He said all of those pitchers showed an ability to be able to excel out of the rotation and the bullpen, and he wasn't going to basically make any comments or declarations now on how they would factor in next year. I was a little surprised that I didn't give David Peterson sort of a acknowledgement as being a starting pitcher that should be locked in next season, but again, he's playing his cards close to the vest. Let's see. Last couple notes here. When it came to Jeff McNeil, he was asked about that. He said, great thing about Jeff is he can fit in a variety of places. That's an exciting piece, a guy that makes roster construction a bit easier. I don't think they're going to eat money and trade Jeff McNeil. I just don't see it. I expect him to be back next year, and I wouldn't be surprised if he was in the starting lineup come opening day. When it comes to hiring a GM, he said he was not eager to do that. He said he likes the performance of his front office right now currently. He likes the leadership team they already have going. He said if someone became available who would be tough to pass up, they would consider it. The last thing they want to do going into this offseason is have a drawn-out process to try to hire a GM just for the sake of hiring one. David Stearns, more than capable of continuing to make all the decisions as the top guy in that front office. He has guys he trusts already in there that are helping him make these decisions. I think it's totally understandable that they don't go out of their way to hire a GM. And who knows, maybe at some point, some great GM gets fired from another team and all of a sudden they latch on to the Mets. You never know. Last couple comments that I thought were really interesting. The Dodgers thing. Someone asked him about how in the past Steve Cohen wanted to be the Dodgers of the East. I love this answer. David Stearns said, I'm not concerned about being anyone else. I'm concerned about being the Mets. I'm concerned about creating the best organization that we can for the Mets with an identity that is uniquely New York and uniquely belongs to this franchise. He said that we started to do that. Building blocks are there, but there's still work to do. Absolutely love that answer. You're not trying to be the team that just beat you. You're the New York Mets, and the New York Mets can have an identity all to themselves, and they can become a model franchise. And this year might have just been step one in making that happen. When it comes to Steve Cohen being a Mets fan and how that might play into Pete Alonso's free agency, I love this answer as well. He said, quote, we are all emotional. There are emotion parts to me as well. He said it's really difficult to strip emotion. He talked about having a process in place that helps you, make informed decisions and try to take some of that emotion out of it. But ultimately, it's always going to be there. And here's the best part. He said, quote, Steve grew up as a Mets fan. I grew up a Mets fan. That's always going to be a part of us. And that's my overwhelming feeling every time I see David Stearns talk. This is a franchise owned by and operated by Mets fans who care about this just as much as the rabid diehard fan base that is so locked into everything going on with this team that we still are pulling great numbers on these podcasts. Despite the fact that the Mets season ended on Sunday, there's still a lot of you that are tuning into these shows because you care and because you are always focused on this team, and you want to know who's going to be the starting center fielder next year. Is Pete Alonso coming back? Are they going to get Juan Soto? Who are the pitchers that are going to fill out their rotation? Mets fans care in a way that I think is unique. I don't think every fan base is this rabid, cares this much. And you get that from your owner, where if the Mets have an opportunity to be overwhelmingly a favorite next year because they can sign Burnes, Soto, and Alonso in one offseason, they have the guy that'd be willing to pony up the cash to do it if the contracts were all deemed the right ones to give out by their front office. And I like that David Stearns has owned it as well, because look, not that he didn't give his all and didn't care deeply about the Brewers organization when he was running it. Of course he did. But there's that little extra layer of motivation when you have all your friends and family who are sending you text messages about all these things and care about this team, and it's a team that you grew up rooting for. I just feel like the Mets have the perfect recipe with their owner, with the president of baseball operations who's making these decisions, to get over that mountaintop. I think they're going to be relentless in the pursuit to get the first World Series title since 1986, and it would be nice if it happened before the 40-year anniversary, and you only got a year left to do that. So we will see what is next for the New York Mets. But what is clear from what David Stearns said today, this is a team that is going to be very aggressive at reshaping the roster for next season. They got a lot of money to spend. They have the right guy in place to spend that money wisely, and I can't wait to see what this offseason has in store. So make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast so you don't miss out on any of my commentary on what's going on with the Mets this offseason. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Tomorrow's show, we're going to have a little World Series talk. I want to discuss what you should be rooting for when it comes to Juan Soto and the World Series. Are we rooting for Juan Soto to win with the Yankees and then job's done and he can go somewhere else? Are we rooting for him to lose so there's not that emotional tie to the Yankees? I don't know. We're going to go through it all tomorrow. I appreciate all of you who tuned in today. If you want to follow me on social, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. You can follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. And for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out the first ever 24/7 streaming channel covering everything in the world of sports, with our local hosts from each team, league-wide hosts from each league. Find Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube.